Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is in the space that you're occupying right now. We want to welcome you to the Level Set. I am pleased and happy as always to be in community with the Dr. Charles Alexander of Chicago, Illinois. He's licensed in other states. So folks, if you need the best, reach out before you discount his availability. I'm attorney Larry Fields here in St. Louis. And this morning we would endeavor to deal with a few topics. We're going to start close to home this morning with the recent passing of several individuals that defy even the life expectancy of Black males. These folks are not living to the already diminished life expectancies in the mortality charts of these United States. That's saying something. We lost Rich Homie Quan this week, as well as Fat Man Scoop. A couple of weeks ago, we lost a brilliant designer, Warry Boswell. And we also lost a brilliant background singer, Tyrone Ellis. And we are losing individuals at an alarming rate. And in fact, at a closer clip, we lost one of uh, the community's mentors in my era in University City, Charles Shegog, who was a barber that I can remember when I started my first big, I should say, medium-sized or big business. He insisted that I came and sold wares in his shop from the old Negro Leagues and was a beam of encouragement. And one of the few barbers in town that barred his entire footprint. He barred his, on Olive Street, in St. Louis, which is a major thoroughway. He barred, which is the equivalent of a strip mall, and used his barbershop as an anchor. And now there, three or four different businesses there. We're losing these individuals that we cannot replace. Doc, what is going on?
Good morning, everybody. This is really just a perpetuation of a trend that has existed uh, for one reason or another since we came to this wretched place. Um, but as certainly as health and health, overall health, and then also kind of mortality data really started to be collected in a formal way, and as they continue to fine tune that process, with CDC and Department of Health and Human Services, and and all those other like institutions, both at a national and state and local level, we're able to get better information. But what we know is that Black men die, on average, Black men die earlier, than all women, kind of across age sectors and race and ethnicity, as well as SES. And probably the same for, relative to white men. And in fact, probably same relative to any group except that of that group that we misnamed and mislabeled Indians. So the indigenous people here are really the only group that have worse health outcomes than the Black man. And so this is the thing.
Doc, that is saying something. That the anchors to this wretched place, as you aptly described it, um, for the most part, taught the early settlers how to survive. Then
Mhm.
the other group built this place because the early settlers didn't, even after being taught how to survive, could not cultivate it. That these folks are the ones that in this country to this date have the shortest life expectancy.
Hmm. And that is spot on. And so, right, so the folks who bear the brunt of the initial incursion, and then the folks who were brought here to, as beast of beast of burden, you know, closely follow, right, in terms of kind of overall outcomes. Now, I, now we have to look and try to figure out, so clearly, clearly there were some other mitigating factors that have impacted, our ability to even, catch, catch stride, like get kind of find our niche, get our groove, even if we still suffer what we suffer. But, in the main, there then exists like a significant gap between us and the indigenous people, so like it's interesting, you can have this conversation with brothers and they'll be like, man, who get treated worse than the black man? And brother, you've been to a reservation. And so we, so the unsettling thing for me is that so many of us don't really even, hey, we're not really aware of, the status of our healthcare, but we don't have a clue, and hence no appreciation for what's going on with the indigenous population. And that is because many of us get distracted by the fact that a number of nations have gambling rights, right? And so we think because any of the nations have gambling rights that all, indigenous people are flush with cash. And actually, I don't even think half the nations have any sort of gambling rights or, mineral rights, those things that would sustain them, those things that, ultimately all, are supposed to come as a result of some treaties. But anyway, we are just not in tune with the status of our health, and some of that has to do with, just kind of fundamentally how we conceive of it. And so we believe if we can get up and go, we healthy. And so all of the signal things that we experience in the interim, we just feel like, well, that's what you're supposed to do. I'm 50. My back supposed to hurt. No, your back ain't really supposed to hurt. That's telling you something, right? I just can't shake this cough. You ain't supposed to be walking around coughing, right? That's not supposed to happen, right? And so like all of these kind of signal things, I've been feeling this tightness in my chest now for about a month. That's signal pain, all right? And so we have gotten to this space where, and we ain't just got there. I don't mean to say that, like, because of the nature of our relationship to the ratchet place, discomfort is part and parcel for us. And so we don't think it as signal, signal pain. We don't think of discomfort as a marker of health or the lack thereof, as a marker of well-being or the lack thereof. So we just tolerate it. I think I got a headache because my boss is getting on my nerves, right? Not because my blood pressure is 3 million over 2, right? And so we endure these things, right? So that's part of it, right? So part of it is, some combination of our misunderstanding and our misrepresentation of, the signs and symptoms that are often present.
You know, rest. I took a yoga class during Black History Month with a sister during COVID. WashU has, did a wonderful job at one time. They've eliminated these programs along with all of their other DEI programs now, close to all of them. But there was a young sister that taught a yoga class that I took remotely. And her statement was rest is a revolutionary concept for slaves. And it is that struck me because we refuse, those of us that are about our business, refuse to take rest actively. You need to actively rest. You need to actively recover. I have a great book that's called, that deals with rest, but we refuse to do it. But Doc, how can we make health and our well-being the number one issue? Because we seem to separate taking care of ourselves from our commercial selves, from our business selves, from our spiritual selves, from our relationship selves. When another great book is titled "It's All One Thing." So if
Mm.
how do we get individuals to put their workout at 60 years old or 50 years old on the same plateau as they put their working day? Those are both important. That conversation with your child is just as important as you taking care of yourself and eating right.
And not that it doesn't change, but over the course of time, but this is certainly, a kind of a learned lifestyle issue. Um, Mr. A worked out minimum of 3 times a week, well into his 80s. If it weren't for the pandemic, he would have continued to get up, go to the gym 3 times a week. As a child, my dad, that's how, like, I walk 5 miles, 5 to 6 miles a day. That started when I was in the third grade because my dad used to come home, get dressed, and go over to Tilly's Park and walk. Right. And so I used to go walk with my dad.
And
And so,
I want to stay there because I think I missed an opportunity last week. You said something that a cardiologist said to me. I go to the cardiologist once a year because I have a runner's heartbeat because I've been running so long. And they make sure that, it's still operating efficiently. But what he told me was that as you get older, you have to do more. You talked about doing that last year, but we tend to believe that as you get older, we do less. Could you
mhm.
could you continue to talk on that?
Yeah,
'Cause I think I missed that opportunity last week.
yeah. So like last week, I was talking about how my numbers creeped up, right? And so I had been I had been on a regimen. I was doing like 5 to 6 miles a day, and and instead of you know figuring out ways to, in an age appropriate manner, to continue to tweak my routine so that I'm always putting the right amount or the adequate amount of stress and tension on the body. I actually was like, well, I'm getting a little older, so I'm gonna do a little less. And so I cut down to like 4, right? And so, I mean, that was working for a lot of other things, but it wasn't working for my overall health, right? So, of course, I had that much more time in a day and this, that, or the other, and blah, 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 blah. But my numbers went up. And so I go to the doctor, and the doctor's telling me he's going to put me on meds. I was like, no, we're not going to do no meds. And so um, I, you know, I have been kind of uh, studying, the latest wonder herb, wonder drug, which ain't really no wonder nothing. It's something that we always have, but we don't necessarily think about in the context of health, and that's beets. So I've been paying attention to beets and all of the stuff that beets people have been talking about. Beets are a great source of nitrous oxide, with which in the health space means that they're vasodilators. That means they open things up for you. And so Doc told me he's gonna put me on meds. I said, no, we're not gonna do that. He said, well, brother, if you come back here and your numbers are still high, them people gonna take money from me. I said, well, no, they ain't gonna take no money, because when I come back, my numbers ain't gonna be high. Yeah. He said, okay, but I'm gonna write you this script. So he wrote the script. I even went and picked up the medication, but I also picked up 32 ounces of beet juice. And so from that day, I started drinking 32 to 64 ounces of beet juice. And I went from 4 miles back up to my 6. And when I went back to him the next quarter, my numbers were down. When I went back to him, the following quarter, so now we're at that 6 month mark, my numbers were still down. When I went for my annual, my numbers were down. And he's like, brother, you did it. And so I'm gonna quit writing you these scripts. And so that's kind of what I've been doing. And so, right, we don't want to exercise, to our detriment. We do want to exercise, at the level, consistent, with our age and ability and things of that nature. And so you always want to, get consultation from your primary care physician, or folks that in your life that are in that space. If you know a trainer, talk to a trainer. If you don't know a trainer, find a trainer, to make sure that you're getting what you need to get. And if you don't know a trainer, and you're a little less inclined to go because you don't trust and all that, that's all good. A good starting place as we age. Many of us, once you get to 45, there's this organization that starts to remind you that you are aging, and ARP starts knocking on your door right around 45, somewhere between 45 and 48. I mean, they always have great tips about what the aging body needs and how you got to do this and how you got to do that. So one part of it is, the self-awareness and the training and the exercise, right? The right sizing your exercise regimen. The other thing is you can't eat the same over the course of time, because again, your body does start to change in terms of how and what it can process and digest, and excrete, right? And so all of that. And then there's the ever so present white supremacy, right? There's the ever so present white supremacy. And so with that, you get black tax and you get weathering. All right, so what's the black tax? Black tax is literally the cost we pay for being black. Everything here for us in this wretched place is literally more expensive and harder to do. And so that puts a toll on the body, right? And that causes the body to produce, inordinate amounts of, stress hormones and, adrenaline and all that kind of stuff. So your body is always always under duress. And so, and for Black women, there's plenty of work that kind of documents that this same thing that we have happens to Black women. And so Black women's, healthcare status is usually, millions of times worse than white women's, again, across socioeconomic and age categories. And they call that weathering, right? And, but it's the same thing for us. We just don't call it weathering. And so this is kind of like our, for better or worse, this has become our baseline, and we got to understand it as such. But again, like I say, many of us, our standard of health is, I got up this morning, right? And how you doing? Well, he woke me up this morning. I'm good and I'm blessed. Well, you are blessed, but you probably ain't good, right? And so we gotta go. We gotta have our annual checkups. Some of us gotta have more annual checkups. I mean, more checkups than just annual. Excuse me. But even that is tricky, because when they told me that, when the doc was like, this is how we gonna go, and we gonna deal with these meds. Of course, now I'm like, this joke gonna check me all along the way, right? Those jokers wouldn't see me. It was like, well, no, your insurance says you get a annual visit. I said, I know I get an annual visit, but the doc just told me that we have a concern. And so I want to do some status checks. And it's like, well, is anything wrong? I said, ma'am, he just put me on medication. Well, that's so that you can get your number. I know why he did it. I'm saying to you,
You need to
I,
monitor it.
yes, I want it monitored. And they told me no. I
And
said, I
that
can't
is,
pay. I said, I can't pay for this. It's like, well, no, that's not how this works. You got to do da 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 da. There has to be another reason that you're. And so it's like, we can't see you, but since you're here, we doing flu shots. You want a flu shot? And so I was like, what the hell is going on here? And so there's all of these kind of little tricky things, right? And and so like I think ultimately he called me or whatever, and he's like, "Yeah, brother, that's good." Blah 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 blah. So they gave me, because I don't think I had at this point I didn't have like my own blood pressure cup or whatever. He said, well, so he said you can monitor this yourself. So, just get a blood pressure cup and da 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 da. And they punched that in and sent me a blood pressure cup. So, so I monitor, so that's the other thing. And that was absolutely important, how I arrived at that. But I was very, 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 very upset, to say the least, that I couldn't get monitoring from the doc. But what that brought to mind and the need for us to have blood pressure cups, because, we go get our blood pressure taken, annually, and act like ain't nothing happening in them 12 months, right? And so in order to note the trend and what's going on with your blood pressure, you need to do that stuff, daily or weekly or some frequent, some reasonable frequency, so that you can recognize and start to understand the trends in that, right? And so, and given the fact that heart disease is the number one killer, then we need to give the requisite attention to that fact. And so so that's what happened last year, and that's kind of what I bring forward. And and like I said, it's like so much of this is lifestyle. And so so on the one hand, I got Mr. A, and then on the other hand, I got dear old mom. Now my mom was hard headed, right? And so when they tell my mom, you need to do this, that, or the other, my mom would be like, well, you got to die or something, right? And so, and I hear people say that stuff all the time. And, for my mom and then subsequently for us, that didn't work out well, because, yeah, you do got to die or something, but what if you don't die? What if you are just here getting progressively worse, right? And you have the low, you had that long, slow, kind of process. And that's what happened to my mom. She had a series of strokes. She wouldn't go. It just kept getting worse and worse and worse until, systems are starting to fail, but she's here. She's a fighter, and da 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 da. Even at one point she was on life support. They kept her on life support so everybody who wanted to come could get there. We're all there. We say our final prayers. They disconnect her. We go out in the room to wait on the, what they're telling us is the inevitable. Some jokers come back 30 minutes later and say, her number's getting better. My mom lived a whole nother year. And, so she's a fighter, right? But she didn't have to experience all of that, right? Some of that was her. Some of that was, kind of her kind of obstinance with, with our care providers, which again is another issue. I mean, it's kind of interesting how these things are dovetailing. I mean, some of that obstinance, all of that obstinance wasn't just her. Some of that obstinance is it's hard for us to find care providers that look like us, right?
Culturally competent care providers.
So so baseline, we need culturally competent care providers, but above that, we need culturally competent care providers that look like us.
Yeah.
So if we got to choose between a culturally competent white doc and a brainwashed black doc, you probably want the culturally competent white doc, right? And if you got a choice between a white doc and a culturally competent white doc, you want the culturally competent white doc. But what you want is the culturally competent brother or sister. That's what you want. Across disorders, we do better with Black professionals who love us, right? Who think that we are in this thing together. And that's what we have. And so you have all of these things. That's where you get into the Black text and the weathering. You have all of these things that are constantly wearing on us. And again, you got sprinkle on a little white supremacy on the top. And there's this constant state of tension that we live in, which is always triggering some physiological processes in our body that are intended to be life-sustaining. But if they get stuck, in a fixed position, they kind of wreak havoc. And that, again, as I typically do, talking about our stress response. And so if we're always perceiving that things are stacked against us, then our body is always preparing to fight or flee. And sometimes it freezes, right? And so that's another thing that we see. Sometimes we see we're not getting the care we need because we literally freeze. We don't want to go. Like some of us have access to care and we don't go because we don't want to know the answer. So for X number of us, it's not that we don't have access to care, it's that we don't go get that care because we don't want to know the answer. And then there's other of us, again, like in that fight, flight, or freeze, that flight space, we're escapists. And rather to go get the help, we run, we flee.
But isn't that what this country?
And we confuse ourselves with all kind of other things as opposed to what we need to do, and then we don't do what we do. And this will walk me into how cynical I can be about my thoughts about our institutions, our churches and synagogues and mosques. It ain't healthcare it is not good healthcare or health practice to say, God got this. Right. And I don't say this stuff because, I'm a hater or I'm an anti this. I have a significant client. I have a significant portion of my clientele that are clergy. I have a significant portion of my of my health continuum that are clergy. Right. And again, whether these people are Christian or Muslim. And I have these same conversations that I come on here and rant and rave about with those same people. So I ain't off in my positions on this, but because I know this happens. Ma'am, sir, you have high blood pressure, you're gonna need to do this. Well, no, I ain't gonna need to do nothing because I got my prayer cloth and I got my book, and the devil is a liar. That ain't healthcare. That ain't healthcare. That ain't mental health care. That ain't nothing. That's escapism. That's magical thinking, right? And so
let's
get involved in this kind of stuff, and that compromises our health and well-being.
It does. Let's stay on escapism, because you hit on a number of areas where we employ that. You talk about not wanting to know what our baselines are. That's escapism.
Yes.
Talk about going to church consistently. That's escapism after it's unhealthy. And we do that. We huddle around the campfire and we talk to one another without really going and implementing what needs to be done. And we're not even holding each other accountable in those groups when we should with our health. We talked about the lack, and that dovetails, as far as I'm concerned, with us, the same mindset that we have that does not want to know our current physical condition is the same one that prevents us from going and doing a deep dive on our history.
Correct.
It's the same mindset. We don't
Correct.
want to know when we need to know. And the reason why is because we already have significant, well, one of the reasons we have significant societal pressure the moment we wake up every day. And we don't know if we can take another thing.
Correct.
And we have been brainwashed into believing that it is a weak person that seeks help, that seeks your
Abs-
assistance.
Absolutely.
So we have a
The
parade
either
of
either
we have a
either that you're
parade of
weak
horribles.
or
We
it's
have
blasphemy.
or blasphemy. So we have a parade of horribles that is resulting in a horrible condition for us physically. And so, as my yoga instructor says, how you gonna pour from an empty cup?
And
So
we
and you
do
got to
that.
raise
Like
so when you raise your children, you're passing all that's the only thing in your cup. So that's the foolishness that we're passing down. And we mean good.
we mean and so and Larry, that's the other thing is then you add to all of that, we have poor social boundaries. We have this our conceptualization of what it means to be the family is really tattered. And what I mean is that I'm taking that piece you just said. You can't pour from an empty cup. You gotta say no sometimes. Well, no, that's my mom. No, you gotta say no to her too. Oh, that's my little cousin, and he had a hut. You gotta say no to him. That's gotta. I know that's your girl, but you gotta say no to her too. We can't say yes to everything all the time. If I got $2, you got one of them. Well, nigga, how you gonna eat?
Right.
Right? And so it's like it it we gotta be more like on the airplane.
That's
You
it.
put that mask on
Man,
first,
listen, that's my
right?
favorite part of the flight. My
Gotta,
favorite part of the flight. And I hush everybody in my row when they get to it. And I look directly with who's ever flying with me. And I said, listen to this part right here. And she says, before you help an incapacitated adult or a child, put your mask on first.
yes, man. It's like, and so we need a whole nother show for how we arrive at that thinking, but that too compromises our health and well-being, because again, it's stressful. And so, because this is another one of those things like, so we know the folks who, you know, look like they got this, right? We know a whole bunch of folks like that, right? But the fact of the matter is, a super majority of us don't come from Jack, right? And so there were some things in our lives that helped to lead us from, some of us, fewer of us, as the narrow, very few people go from abject poverty, to, killing the game. Very few. More of us necessarily go from working class and lower middle class to a higher level, right? But at that working class and that lower middle class, for Black folks in particular, there is no significant amount of wealth, right? So when you do get identified as that home run hitter, and you are literally batting 300, right? Which still means you ain't getting it done all the time. You're getting it done a good amount of time relative to the competition. And you start to have some resources accrue to you. All those people who were a part of your climb, all those people who were left in your wake, they think they're entitled to your product. And you probably think they're entitled to your product. And I'm not saying you can't help. I'm saying it requires boundaries, right? And so So many times we don't even recognize the amount of family stress that some of us have who have achieved whatever it is that they wanted to achieve academically and professionally, because there are so many other people that they gotta help, right? And I'm not saying don't help. I'm saying you gotta have a structured way in which you help. You gotta have boundaries, right? It was his brother that played for the 49ers. Um, he got his parents a house, and you know, I don't know all the particulars about why he didn't pay for it, but by the time he retired, the house wasn't paid for, right? And so he continued to pay for it. And then at a point where it was a burden because of whatever else was going on in his life in retirement, he told his parents, "We're gonna have to sell the house." Them jokers sued him, right? And so
We could have kept our old house. We ain't had to come over here.
all kind of matters, right? And so it's all of these types of things, you know, that kind of weigh on us all the time, and they weigh on us in a disproportionate manner because we came here under some very distinct um, circumstances, and we descend from that. And so the nature of our relationship to this ratchet place ain't really changed. All it is morphed into, into the condition, yeah, into the condition that would come with, technological and societal advance.
It's a more palatable N word.
Correct.
It's, you brought something up when you mentioned the beach, Doc, that made me think of my mother this morning. I showed up to her house. I think I was in law school, and I was dressed a certain way. And she says, "It's amazing how, you've come full circle into wearing the exact same things I brought you home in as a child, and they're current to you now." And when you brought up beats, I thought about, those are things my father instilled that we should eat, and we've gotten away from. I've gotten away from it. And oftentimes it's going back home. This rage of kale now. When my father was growing, they called it poke salad on the side of the house for years, along with a number of vegetables and fruits. The freshest collard greens and the tomatoes my father would make, would grow, were amazing. We've gotten away from some of the things, the roots that our parents and grandparents and so forth have instilled in us.
Brother. So I've been in Atlanta this week. I've been on campus in Morehouse. You wouldn't recognize. First of all, you wouldn't recognize Shivers. You wouldn't recognize the dining hall now. But but more importantly, you wouldn't recognize the food options. I had beets in the cafeteria at Morehouse College this week. Like,
Oh, wow.
and so we've significant, and that's and I mean, it was already better than what it was when we were there, but in the past, in probably the past 5 months, we've had another significant uh, upgrade, and that is that the Magic Johnson Group bid and won the contract for food services at Morehouse. And so considerable upgrade in terms of meal preparation and and meal options available to our young men and to our faculty if they should choose to indulge, and then just sitting down talking to students, talking to some of the upperclassmen, being on campus for 3 to 4 weeks or close to a month now, like, so what do you think about the cafeteria thus far versus when you left? Everybody, oh, this is, everybody, thumbs up. And the thing is, these young jokers eat it. So if you put healthy food in front of people, guess what? People tend to eat healthy food. But if you put ratchetness in front of them, they eat it. And the bad part about the ratchetness, when you put it in front, you say, this is how we survive.
Right.
Well, you ain't got to eat survival food.
Right.
right? You know, so we ate that way before because that's what we had to eat, right? You know, many of us, and that, you know, even that is regional, and you know, and so all of this, you know, it just requires that we understand. But I'm share this with you also. I reference these people who come for you, you know, at some point, you know, they might be, yeah, they be throwing this little lifeline. Folks be trying to run from them, but you know, it's you can't have it both ways. You can't be like, you know, uh, you can't want to be here and don't want to age, right? Can't have it both ways, right? And so you can't be upset when them folks from AARP come and call it, because you know they come bearing gifts. You get to decide which of those gifts you want to partake in,
Mm.
but they come bearing gifts, and so I utilize them for the information because they tend to have good information. And so check this out. This is relevant to our conversation. AARP conducted a national survey of more than 1,200 Black men to get a snapshot of their physical and mental health experiences with healthcare providers and views on disease prevention. 3/4 of respondents gave a good, very good, or excellent assessment of their physical health. 83% gave the same positive marks for their emotional health, and 84% gave the same marks for their mental health. Still, AARP discovered some disconnects. The survey found 80% of Black men 50 plus are aware that eating a healthy diet and maintaining a healthy weight lowers their risk for serious health conditions, and most believe they are eating well. Yet 42% acknowledge being overweight, and just 24% meet the weekly recommendations for exercise, and only 23 report getting enough sleep. And so that great documentation of the disconnect that we're talking about, right? And you were talking about a minute ago, you know, this revolutionary, this radical ideal of rest, you know, and again, we got this stuff kind of built in, don't sleep, you gotta be on your grind. No, you gotta rest. You gotta rest. And so that becomes this whole other thing, you can't sleep. And then at some point you be like, I got headaches, I can't concentrate. Just figure you got X number of people who are either suffering in silence or are being medicated because they're misdiagnosed, because they're being seen by a person who don't really care or understand. And really all they needed was more sleep, right? I can't think straight. Well, you can't think straight because your brain is exhausted, right? You can't concentrate because your brain is really trying to go to sleep. Your brain is trying to go to sleep and you keeping it up, right? And so this is happening. And what do people do when they can't sleep?
They drink coffee,
They drink coffee.
which is
They
a
drink
drug,
coffee and they drink energy drinks, right?
and energy drinks.
Right, right. And so then you get on this treadmill and you can't go to sleep. And then you just, it's taking a toll on your mental and your physical health. And so this is what's going on. And the worst part about it is, just as what's noted in this article, is the disconnect, right? Because again, if I get up, I'm good. No, you got up, as you said, because he woke you up. But don't mean that you're good. He probably woke you up because he was thinking that you was going to do something different today than you did yesterday that would greatly increase the likelihood that he could wake you up tomorrow. That's why he woke you up today, because he was thinking you would have learned something about what you was doing yesterday that was putting yourself in peril.
And some Christians have got to get out of the mindset of just passive worship. Working out is worship too. You thanking them for
That's
the
taking care of the temple. You manage it.
yeah, I
You got
mean,
to tuck point this joker,
bruh,
right?
you
You
got
got to
to
do some
tuck
tuck
point
point.
it, and then on top of that, God gives you the mind and the ability to go and
Yes.
work out. But man, bruh, I can point to the corner right here. That's the corner of my street and Grand Boulevard. When I get to that corner after every workout, I take my hat off and I thank God for the mind and the ability for whatever run I've done. Now here lately, a couple about a month ago, Doc, I got back down to under 9-minute miles, and I lost my mind. And that's all I want to do now is run fast. And and so I've gotten back down to 835, and lo and behold, I've got a hamstring injury. So now I'm nursing that, but still, it is, we have got to take our faith to a different level. That you have a responsibility to take care
Yes.
of your body. And let me say this, our own Jerry L.T. Christmas checked in this morning. He is today is his birthday, and he just completed the Trap Run, which is a run that they had in St. Louis that is inundated with DJs along the route. I would have loved to have run it, but of course I have the show, and this is my number one priority at this time. But I think it was a 5K, and he just completed it. So I mean, we're all on the same page, even when we're not.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And so, that's the thing. And then again, like, so you be talking to somebody, but he was perfectly healthy and he just dropped dead. That don't happen. You don't just a perfectly healthy body don't just drop dead. There was a something, right? Even for the person who was fine until the blood clot, it was something that precipitated the blood clot.
Typically birth control if it's women.
And so, so we have to shift into these spaces and quit, we got to demystify this stuff, right? And assume our relative responsibility. So that's the one piece. And again, like the other piece, like if we look at, and I've talked about this before, if we look at COVID, right? Mental health and well-being was getting worse for the 20 years prior to COVID, right? And because a lot of crazy things have occurred, right? So like, and we've talked in here, like what's going on with our kids, right? So if your kids are 25 to 30, this past 25 years ain't been great, right? And we can start with the benign. If your kids are 25 to 30, they may have been impacted by the, the heightened anxiety that came with Y2K, right? You remember that? You remember people hoarding,
Potted meat, had potted
yes,
bottled
yes,
water.
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
all that.
yes.
Yeah.
And so, people don't really talk about that, but that was a thing.
That was a big thing.
Right.
And
So what's going to happen when the clock strikes 2000?
Right.
Right. So let's start our 25-year analysis, in that space, right? Right. So like that would give us 24. But okay, so let's go back to the year before. What we got? We got James Byrd down in Texas getting dragged through the city until his body fell apart. Right. It's strewn all through the city. National news. Right. So from 99 to 25, to 24, so we continue to have, lynchings and police brutality. Then we have this manufactured scare. And you got to know this Y2K thing is manufactured, because what did it do? It drove consumption. Right. And then we come out of that, and into the hanging Chad, right? So we come into we in some of them Bush shenanigans, right? And then you come out of that to 9/11, right? Come out of that to Katrina, right? And eventually you had a Gulf War. Then you have a housing crisis and a recession, right? Then somewhere in that space, this black guy with a funny name gets to speak at the national convention, And that makes white folks mad because they see that there's this black messiah that is once again rising, right? So you start to have, you know, some already contentious politics get worse because there's this stir that this dude with the funny name could ascend to the highest honor or office in these United Ratchet States. And so in the wake of that, you have the rise of, you have the public reemergence. I ain't gonna say the rise, but the public reemergence of the Klan, and in the political space, the Tea Party, right? And this space is very important because this space is very important to how we process these things, because we got to stop saying that Donald Trump emboldened these people. These people been here. These are the people who are responsible for the health outcomes that we're talking about right now. He didn't embolden or create these people. These people been here. We've been sick the whole time we've been here because these people been here the whole time that we've been here. And so this guy, helps X number of us to understand that the Clintons are the white supremacists that they always were. He wins a contentious election, and then the onslaught by the white supremacists gets greater and greater and greater. Meanwhile, the police are steadily killing black men, unarmed black men, unarmed black women, a quarter or maybe perhaps a little more of which were mentally ill and unarmed, right? Then, then they shoot Michael Brown, then they shoot, Sandra Bland, and or they hang Sandra Bland, all of this stuff, choke my man in New York, all of this.
Tamir Rice, don't forget about that, our baby.
They shoot the 12-year-old in the park. All of this, the trajectory is this. And that trajectory ain't just for us. That trajectory is for everybody. And so in the 20 years prior to the pandemic, there was a rise in depression, anxiety, ER visits, and suicide, all before the pandemic, right? And so then when we get to the pandemic, one of the things that happens, and really the mental health overall was not as bad as what the media was saying. And then we got to know that the media piece of this was really a right-wing thing to kind of justify opening up, right? But what was bad was that the escapist routes and mechanisms that people typically use to manage their well-being were not available to them. That is what the major problem with the pandemic was. And so you had things happen because of that. You had people, having to, so people who might have been relatively safe otherwise in some circumstances were having to hunker down and stay in place with the relative threat. So if your caretaker was an abuser, you stuck with the caretaker. If your mate was an abuser, you stuck with your mate. That part was a problem, no doubt. But this rise and suicide that was being alleged, that typically wasn't the case. That was the case. That wasn't really the case. The numbers for white folks don't bear that out. The numbers for most folks don't bear that out. The numbers for black folks and the indigenous people bear that out. Everybody else either had a decline in suicide or they stayed at, kind of on par with what had been going on. Black folks and the indigenous population had an increase in suicide during the pandemic. And so in the context, what we get in the context of the pandemic relative to the conversation that we're having today, you start having, we start hearing about Black men dying young. Well, that too was media driven. I'm not saying they weren't dying. I'm saying that the news of it is media driven, because Black men die early every day. They ain't talking about Black men, you know, there's no worry about like, so like what you're reporting now, they just reporting the death. They're not talking about this being some outlier. You know what I'm saying? Like we're talking about it as a call to arms. But when you get it on the news, this is just par for the course. But during the pandemic, you're hearing the story because they were trying to link the alleged early death of Black men to the vaccine, right? When in reality, we were dying for the same reasons that we was dying before the pandemic. Now, the pandemic in and of itself, true to form with what they were telling us, if you already had compromised organ system, then you are at greater risk during the pandemic. And so if perhaps if, you had some asymptomatic strain of the virus, it gets in, it makes a bad situation worse. You dead, folks looking around like he was perfectly healthy. He was perfectly fine, which we always say when we ain't anyway. Then we were looking around, why did he get it? Well, he just got the vaccine. And so now you blaming it on the vaccine, right? And I ain't saying it ain't nobody died because of the vaccine, because that's just not what medication does, right? And so when we take medication, X number of folks have adverse effects, right? And there's a algorithm for any particular medication that says something to the extent that if the overwhelming majority of folks are going to be okay, then the loss, there's an acceptable level of loss. Now, folks might not like that, but that's really how stuff works. That's how your army works. Your army sends folks to fight, understanding that there's an acceptable level of loss, and then they tell you that it was worth it when they keep their kids home. But I digress. So,
in the words of Zeke from the Nutty Professor, when Buddy Love said, man, if Zeke died, nobody would care. Zeke said, hell, I'd care.
yes,
I'm like, Zeke, baby, I'd care. What are you talking about?
That's how this stuff looks. And so we can look all over the place for why Black men die. But what we have to appreciate is, regardless of what's going on in this righteous place, Black men die younger. Period. So if you need to attribute it to gun violence, do that. If you need to attribute it to the vaccine, do that. Whatever you want to attribute, the white man is that. That's fine, because there is some degree to which all of that shit is true. What is the underlying fact is that we die younger than everybody across the board, except for the indigenous people.
Brother, when you laid that timeline out so succinctly, I really thought about the increased use of marijuana from this generation. And I'm saying, hell, weed for everybody after that time.
Yes.
I mean, and I'm an anti,
Yeah.
stimulant guy along those lines, but man, we often look at the cause without looking at the effect.
That's all of this stuff is happening all the time. And so another thing to fit into this is social media. So social media the rise in social media. So like in the latter, so you come out of college, 88, 89, when you come out?
89, 90.
89, 90. You go into the corporate space. In the business arena, you got people, using this. So there's this technology that is now available in the corporate space that the military has been using for quite some time, and they
Al
call
Gore found it.
And they call it email, right? And so you got that. So then by the time we get into the latter 90s, we have AOL, and now email is a thing. And we start to see kind of the rise of social media. Then by the time you get to the somewhat 04, 05, somewhere in there, we start to see MySpace and da 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 da. You know, we start to see these things, and so there's a whole nother piece that you have to attach to the combined effects of, you know, social media and not just gaming but graphic gaming, you know, and so all of these things have to be placed in that 25-year, you know, from
Yes,
you know, this you know, this witch's brew that has been in the cauldron boiling
absolutely.
from 1999 to 2024 are the reason, are part and parcel of the reason why, you know, our kids look the way they look, and why, you know, you know, this health burden on the Black population in general, and in this particular conversation, Black men in particular, has continued to look the way it looks. Because again, if we flip the narrative, then, you know, we know that Black women, regardless of when they're made aware of the diagnosis, have poor outcomes with breast cancer. You know, even when theirs is detected before, you know, earlier than white women's piece. And so we know that, you know, across the span, you know, maternal morbidity or mortality is higher for Black women. You know, infant mortality higher for Black infants, and I think it's higher for male Black infants, but I don't want to sound like I need to check that. I don't want to sound like I'm in some conspiracy, even though conspiracies do happen. And so, but all of these things exist, right? And so, all of that impacts our overall health and well-being, our mental health and well-being. And, you know, although this wasn't David Satcher's, he's not responsible for coining the phrase, but he's a person that oftentimes uses it, and he's the reason I use it, is that there is no health without mental health, right? And so if we are not of right mind, it's very hard for us to take care of our body.
And
And I would suggest that part of the reason that we don't take care of our body is because we are not of right mind.
well, that ties a bow on that conversation. But it does not stop there, because all of that dovetails into a topic that is glaring in the media this morning. We had two school shootings, um, one of which is, you know, been highly publicized, one of which you had to notify me of this morning. I didn't see anything about it. And, you know, one in Georgia and one in Baltimore. And so we're now looking at school age children that have been impacted by the exact same timeline that you just aptly laid out.
And
Parents
so,
yeah,
yes. And so that's another thing that we have to pay attention to. Columbine is 25 years ago.
right.
I could tell. I was sitting.
I was
It's a Jamaican space over on 83rd and Cottage Grove called Joe's. I was sitting in Joe's with one of the newts. We was having a late lunch, and part of the reason why it was so ironic that, you know, for me personally in that space, is that he went to a neighboring school. He was from Denver. He went to a neighboring
oh,
school
wow.
for Columbine. And so while we're watching this, he was like, I grew up there. Right. And so real time, I'm sitting there and da 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 da. Now, here's the craziness. The other day, I'm sitting in the Morehouse lunchroom, facing the TV, having a wonderful lunch provided by Magic Johnson and his people. And what do I see? A high school shooting. Right. And I'm watching it real time because they're showing the kids being evacuated. They're showing parents coming to pick them up. They're showing the first responders, because it still had, it was an active when they started, the broadcast, it was an active shooter, right? And so I think 4 people died in Georgia.
Four, from what
And
I understand.
yeah,
And
I
it's
think it was 2
ironic.
teachers and 2 kids, and
It's
then several other people were injured. But you were gonna say?
ironic, one black child and one looked to be Hispanic child and two white teachers.
And so I haven't gone back to get any more specifics on that. I just know that, as I pivoted, you know, and just kind of looking at some of my other news, I started to see things about, the Biden Harris response, and then the stuff that you hear on the other side. And this is, this is an interesting conversation. And I'm gonna reference Mr. A. I grew up with guns. Mr. A is a sportsman, and for much of my life, there were probably 10 rifles in the house. Now, ain't no semi-automatic stuff. We got rifles, shotguns, and stuff like that. No, he ain't had no pistols or whatever. But you know, you seen our house. This is just a modest house. So you got 10 guns, they're gonna be all over the place in that house, right? And so there was a gun, literally there's a rifle in every room, right? And so there's a rifle in his bedroom, there's a rifle in our room, there's a rifle everywhere. And but we didn't touch those rifles, right? That I touched those rifles when we would go to Central Missouri, which is where my parents are from, because it was my responsibility for those rifles to get from their respective places in our household into the back of the car. That was my job. That was my job from probably the age of 6 or 7 is when I started handling those rifles. From 6 or 7, my job was to get the rifles and to get the medicine chest. That was my job when we were packing. Once I was taught that, and Pete, that was my job. And so I made sure that those things got into the car. Once we got to Central Missouri, my job was done. It was not I had no responsibility for taking those rifles out. Now I had to take the medicine chest out the car, but I was not to touch those rifles once we got to Central Missouri, because those guns stayed in the back of the car until my dad went hunting, right? And so this thing that we have now, where now that we're starting to see these suits, and again, we can look over the last 25 years. I mean, like, some of these kids that are involved in these things, some of them are just finding guns, in their household. X number of them do the little ghost gun thing. But, there's a significant number of these kids, who are using these AR style rifles and going into these places. Their parents are giving them these guns. Their parents are facilitating that process, right? And so up until this stuff really, 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 just got to a point where, there was some, somewhere in there had to be some kind of, I don't know who did it, like, because I don't really trust the motives of Walmart, but at some point there got to be it got to a level of concern that Walmart took all those ARs out of their stores. Because you could literally, because again, I do Central Missouri. I could go to a place called Clinton, Missouri. I could just drive up to Clinton, walk in there, walk into Walmart, buy AR, and be up. Well, nobody gonna say nothing. It was perfectly legal, right? And so, people buy those guns for their kids and da da da, blah 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 blah, and all of that is happening again in this span. This stuff is happening, and it's kind of hard for us to question how how people could use gun violence and problem solve when we've been in a perpetual war since 1990. So we've been meddling around in the Middle East in ways that we hadn't in a long time since 1990, since the first Gulf War, right? We've been solving our problems and with weapons of mass destruction. This is what we've been doing. We're right now funding the genocide of the Palestinians, right? We are right now clapping our hands about this sister who we didn't want 4 years ago. We forgot that part. We didn't want her 4 years ago, which is why we didn't support her, which is why she dropped out, right? And so we didn't want her, but now we want her, right? And she ain't told you she about to stop that madness over in Palestine. No, because she ain't. She gonna do the same thing. And so given United States foreign policy, it can't be, and in fact, given, so their foreign policy and their domestic policy are both wrought with violence.
They mirror one another everywhere,
Yes, police
every community.
violence. Correct. Police brutality is a manifestation of United States domestic policy.
In Africa, we have the same.
And so when we see this stuff, we have to understand that this stuff isn't just coming out of nowhere. This stuff, is national, is state, and local, and is home. So again, the only thing I agree with the Republicans on this piece is guns don't shoot people, people shoot people. I agree with that. And the reason I agree with that, because my dad's home ain't the only home I grew up in where I had access to guns. That was my family is from Central Missouri. We hunt and fish. There's always guns. Always, 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 always. But if you are in the company of responsible gun owners, then they manage it in that way. And so, you don't have those relative risks. And so we have that situation, in Georgia. That space was that place was like 40, I think it was like 45 miles maybe south of Atlanta. I think it's south. The only thing I think I'm right on is the distance. Wherever it is, however it's oriented, north, south, east, or west, it's like 40 miles from Atlanta. And so then we get out of that, go out, run some errands with my wife yesterday, come in, we sit down at the bar, we're about to watch some TV, and news breaks that there is there's a shooting in I think Maryland. And this occurs in a school setting. Sounds like from the stuff that I heard yesterday, because I haven't circled back to this, that there was an altercation. So it doesn't sound like this was like one of those active shooter types of things. It sounded like there was an altercation. The gun was already on the premise. I don't know if the gun was in the locker or maybe this kid had it in his bag. But there was an altercation of some sort, and then the gun is retrieved. The guy goes, gets the gun, and he comes back and he shoots the other guy. Now, certainly, it could have been premeditated in the sense that there might have been some ongoing drama, and guy brought the gun, because this is how he was going to settle the drama. And so, that could be. But again, we have to look at all of these things that impact the way that we handle our business. And then for this, I want us to go back a little further yet again. So all of those reasons that I just said, you know, so the United States is a violent place, and the United States has violent foreign policy and violent domestic policy, and you know, and I mentioned the graphic gaming. I didn't mention, but I'll mention now, the increased ratchetness in rap music. But that I only do for this next segue is that the 70s were bad. The latter 60s were bad. This thought that it was, you know, the streets wasn't crazy before rap music. Either you're literally ignorant and don't know, or you a liar, right? It's one or the other. You know, it's like either you're just ignorant and you don't know, or you are a liar, right? You know, Larry, you live here. You can still drive around. You can still see some stuff that be saying, you know, rest in peace, David Barksdale. You know, rest in peace. That, you know, all that kind of stuff. You know, cult, for Black folks, cult classic, Cooley High, right? What they yelling in the theater? Disciples, right?
You ain't said nothing.
This stuff ain't new.
Yeah.
Right? This stuff ain't new. And so you could be talking to Negroes in Chicago. Well, you know, it used to be they had rules. Them Negroes is criminals. There wasn't never no rules. Right? They killed people. Period.
Right.
I listened to a cat tell me, well, he was talking to other members of my family. I was just kind of listening peripherally. He told me, he's like, you know, when I grew up, you know, they were still fighting with, you know, guys were still knuckling up. Come on, man, what world you live in? In 1992, there was 1,000 murders in Chicago. Negro, they wasn't doing this.
No, I was there then too.
You was there.
Yeah,
you was there. If Negroes was fighting with fists, the minister would not have called the Million Man March. Get out of here! I don't want to hear this foolishness. And so this stuff predates whatever it is that we even those things that I was talking about in the context of the past 25 years. This stuff exists, but it exists because of the foreign and the domestic policy. And why do I say so? Because in response to, you know, the various uprisings across the United States and those in California in particular, what did California set up? What did Los Angeles set up? SWAT. That's why we got SWAT. We got SWAT to suppress the urban rebellion, right? But was it a rebellion, or was it the urban protest, right? So we got SWAT.
It was an assertion,
right? We're asserting our right.
Assertion of humanness,
right? And so, in response to our assertion, they create a special tactics unit to go fight against the Panthers and whoever else. That's where this come from. And then they create a TV show so that they can indoctrinate our kids that they're on the right side, right? So
and let me stop you there, Doc. I mean, let me pause you there just for a second. You talked about rap music and its essentially soundtrack for these killings. Hollywood is the biggest provocateur.
They created this.
They are the biggest one of the and then we allow that to be doubled down in literature. And since we have eliminated the vast majority of Black university presses, we don't have the volume to combat what they're doing. So we don't have enough Dr. Charles Alexander's on print. You know, Amos Wilson, you know, and the progeny were doing as much as they possibly could, but we still are rearranging chairs on the deck of the Titanic because we are being warred against by individuals whose job is 24/7, 365 to create a narrative where Black folks are dehumanized. And now we have comedians and actors doing it for them. You know, you got a comedian that'll say white folks and call us the N-word in the same skit, and talk about the virtues of whiteness and the decrepitude of being black, or an N-word, in every shape of the imagination. So, I mean, this is, we've got a really hostile environment.
And we've always had it, right? And so that's another one of my pet peeves. You know, back in the day, if it was good back in the day, we wouldn't celebrate Dr. King's birthday.
Right.
Period. Right. we you know, this it's just things that we have to consider. And so at the same time that they're giving us that they're, you know, giving a SWAT, we got the you know, we got the rise of black exploitation, right? All these guys are pimps and or drug dealers, right? And it's actually them that, you know, when we start to look at the change in rap music, so we have just party, and then, you know, depending on your source, you know, you know, I mean, kind of regardless of your source, but for the sake of argument, is it, you know, I think the message is a good point. A good, you know, so with the message, you then start to have this interjection of you know, what we now call conscious rap, right? But when folks start to go more into this, you know, this violent stuff, much of that stuff is in the context of black exploitation. You know, much of this is relative to, you know, the Mac, Superfly, you know, the Big Payback. I mean, it's in they're drawing back, like the music. They're going back, and it's those soundtracks, it's those content, it's those characters. They're sampling lines, right? And from a purely entertainment space, I ain't got a problem with all of that stuff.
Not at all, because we're intoxicating on screen.
But
the problem.
But the issue is, you know, once that art form is co-opted, then we get what we get, right? And then we get, you know, so in the context of the co-option, that's when the messages get, you know, get twisted. So in 06, I think it is.
06?
I think you might like that.
06? My man.
So
that's what I'm talking about right there.
I'm doing an internet show. What one of your so I was doing some work. I had a radio show called The Better Man. This internet radio show called The Better Man with Bill Butler. You know Bill Butler?
I don't
so,
think
you
I know.
So Cheryl Butler, the news anchor on ABC Chicago.
Yes.
Her brother, Bill Butler, he's one of your frat brothers. But anyway, he has done, you know, momentous things in the state of Illinois in this IT space. And one of the things that he did was try to launch he launched a internet-based radio show. And so I was one of the hosts on that show. I did a show called The Better Man. And so in that space, we would run we had some actual private app, some sponsors, and then we would also run stuff from that ad campaign, right? So they always you can get any, like, we can run those if we want to. You can go to the ad campaign, get those ads, and run those ads, and because they're free, and they're literally public service announcements. And so I'm listening. We on commercial break on my show, and Russell Simmons and Jay-Z come on.
Mm-hmm.
And they do a 30 to 60 minute spot on anti-Semitism, right? These Negroes the year before were on Oprah Winfrey debating that it was their constitutional right to say nigger.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's a word. I don't, I'm not advocating for it. I ain't really advocating against it either because I don't care, right? I'm not the guy that's just walking around just blah, 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 blah. I think it's a word, and I don't think it's any more harmful than using bitch, right? Because as far as we're concerned, they all come from the same place. Bitch, wench, nigga, it's all the same. Like, I grew up listening to black women call more than a few little black girls heifer. So it can't be no worse, me calling him a nigga than it is a grown-ass woman calling a little girl a pregnant cow. All that shit's the same to me. But what's not the same is for two of the biggest brand names in the business to say, let's be mindful of anti-Semitism, and at the same time advocating, from a constitutional position that it's okay to say nigga. That is crazy. And so that gets to the point you were talking about with some of our comedians. On the one hand, extolling the virtues of the white folks, and then just talking crazy about black folks. But that ain't new. I mean, and even in the conversation about whether or not we're gonna use the word, don't come to me talking about, well, even Richard Pryor changed. Richard Pryor is crazy. And so don't carve that out and excuse all of the craziness that comes with Richard Pryor. I'm not saying there's no good in Richard Pryor. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying don't leverage your conversation about whether or not we're going to use that word with the fact that joker went to Africa and came back with a different perspective. That's what I'm saying.
Well, you just took me back to school. You had to have a source at Morehouse when you quote, in our casual conversations. Even if it was Jet or Ebony, you had to have a source. Your standalone declarations, unless you had some sort of empirical data, just didn't suffice. And I think that's why we produce so many critical thinkers. And I'm not saying that Richard Pryor is not a great source on some things. I was quoted to him this week. He was quoted to me this week by someone referring to, Cori Bush was a whole nother issue, but still, your sentiments are heartfelt and, important.
And the point being, again, is that all of these things are manifestations of the foreign policy and the domestic policy, which then gets to be a state and local policy that impacts things like gun violence, right? That impacts things like, so we just can't be confused by what we see, we can't be confused or surprised by what we see in the streets when this is how this nation works. Every other it can't be remarkable to us that we continue to have a drug problem where every single show that you're watching is somehow sponsored by the pharmaceutical industry. With a whole bunch of disclaimers about why you shouldn't use it.
Right.
And again, I'm not telling you don't use the medication. I'm telling you to pay attention to what the medication is and why is this buoying your popular culture. And if it is buoying your popular culture, then you got to understand why your popular culture looks the way it is. So clearly, commercial TV is about money. Right.
Well, I mean, it's in the title. It's in the title.
That's what it means, right? Commercial TV, right? So why wouldn't the guy on the street think, okay, they making money with drugs, I can make money. I mean, but this is not complicated, right? This is not complicated, and so it can't be happenstance that when the United States went into Afghanistan, we got more heroin on the streets.
Nope. We needed those poppy fields.
So it can't be happenstance. I have no reason to believe that the guy that Denzel Washington portrayed
Frank
in
Lucas.
yeah, I think
Heard
I think
that.
all of that is a farce.
It is a farce because he wasn't the smart one anyway. They said they got
Yeah,
it the smarts to pull that off.
all of that stuff is a farce. So Frank Lucas ended up playing the same role that Freeway Ricky Ross played. Now, Ricky Ross was really, he was doing what he was doing, but he had access to that cocaine because of the Iran Contra piece. The United States was running cocaine into LA. People watching Snowfall don't know that's what they watch,
Right. And they didn't
right?
show half of it. They,
Yes.
there's a portion. Well, actually, there's a guy that states that he and his buddies were hanging out on a block. What he thinks now was a DEA agent came to them and said, "Hey, look, there's a shipment of guns coming in that are going to be stopped on the railroad at such and such and such and such." And they went over there and got more guns than any army.
They do
That
the same thing, or they used to do the same thing over in Inglewood. You just have a shipment of guns, train just stopped over in
yeah,
Inglewood. People go get whatever they want, and so, but again, those the flooding of New York with heroin, and again, it's out of this that rap music allegedly comes. The flooding of New York with heroin, you know, the flooding of LA with cocaine. It's out of this that we start to, so on the front end, that's how we see, the devastation, the street devastation. And then you see the people turn to culture, as a relief, and then if we listen to, again, the co-opted story, DJ Cool Hurt, blah, 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 blah. Well, come on, man, you wasn't the only one playing music.
right,
And so,
right.
but that's the narrative, that's fine. But it's out of that degradation that we end up with rap music. And then, it just so happens that, you know, not that it runs, not that it runs totally parallel, but it does so happen that the rise of what we now call gangster rap, even though that content can be heard on the East Coast also, prior to NWA and prior to Ice-T, like Ice-T is even a sample, I think, of Schoolie D. So Schoolie D, I believe, is from Philly. So we were already kind of into that street piece, into the rap game. But that high and that rise of it as a separate genre comes as a result, I do believe, of the Iran-Contra piece, right? And the spread of, because with that, you don't just get the cocaine into California, you get it sweeping across the nation, right? But that is a clear manifestation of the impact of U.S. foreign policy on domestic policy and its impact on state and local pieces. And so it's within that we see all of our health disparities. It's within that we see all of this violence in the street. And that's for whether it's Black or white. And again, we can die. We go back to our 25-year piece. If I extend it, if I do that 25, it was, I think it's what, I think it was like, was it March? Oh, it was like March or April or something like that of 1999 that Columbine happened, which is a school shooting, which it wasn't even the first one, but we have that. And so, but you got to sprinkle all of the school shootings, just like you have to sprinkle all of the death due to the police shootings. You got to sprinkle all of that into this 25-year piece in terms of our overall health and well-being. And so all of this is going on, and we're already a targeted and marginalized group. This gets us back to your original question. Why do Black men die earlier? Because this is the scenario that we live in.
And that is correct. I mean, I think that I think the case has been laid perfectly. And we have got to get over this. We have, you know, my daughter and I, the youngest one, talk about these studies all the time. And there's one particular study where they put these mosquitoes in a covered um, uh, apparatus. And the covered apparatus is, you know, 3 inches tall. Then they remove the apparatus, you know, they gradually increase the apparatus, you know, up to, you know, a foot. And the mosquitoes never, after being trapped in that apparatus at 3 inches, they never rise above that because they've been conditioned that that's as high as they can go. That has happened to us, and we've got to do a better job of identifying that when we've got to come out of that. And I think one of the things, you know, us characterizing ourselves as the N word dehumanizes us. It's not a term of endearment. And it makes it easier for other folks to dehumanize us. And it makes it easier for us to dehumanize ourselves. I think the five percenters, we're talking to some guys and says, call him your brother. Now, you know, now you superimpose my brother in any rap song. I'm gonna go kill my brother as opposed I'm gonna go kill these N words. Doesn't even sound right. We got to do a better job of humanizing ourselves. I'm not concerned about the way the other side looks at us, but if we operate our nation in a manner the way we should, we will be much better off.
Well, what I do disagree with is it don't make it easier for nobody to do anything to us. They do it anyway. So I do disagree with that point. But you know, I appreciate all of it. And but back to that that mosquito thing, it's also hard to rise for that mosquito to rise when the government is driving around St. Louis indiscriminately spraying DDT off the back of them trucks to see what the see what the impact gonna be on the Black community, right? So that's another reason why we sick, right? Because some of us have respiratory issues that stem from experiments like that, like, you know, the government releasing all kind of agents into the air in St. Louis and other cities to kind of see what the long-term impact is going to be. So again, like, you know, like we have an idea that some of this stuff happened. Like everybody, you know, has some thoughts about this thing we call the Tuskegee experiment, but we act like that was the exception. That's the rule.
That's the rule, man.
That's what the United States government does. And just think about when you was growing up, how many times you saw kids running down the street chasing a mosquito truck.
That smoke, that smoke.
Running in that smoke, all of it is chemicals.
Mhm.
All them jokers got cancer, asthma, you know, just all kind of stuff that has come from the United States federal, state, and local policies as it relates to us. And that stuff, this is what we see. This is what we see. How we live is a manifestation of that, right? And so I get it. Those things we can control, we should control. So if we can control the use of that word that nobody want to use,
yeah, you know, I mean,
but if you think that that's going to change the DDT, that shit ain't gonna happen.
No,
and so,
we've got it. We have an eternal, an eternal enemy that is going to war against us no matter what.
Yes, that joker going to war against us regardless, and he gonna call us that regard. Only reason. Oh, I mean, and again, the only reason that it's you just can't script this stuff. Only reason that so we have gotten to a point now where we're arguing this, right? I ain't talking about me or you, I'm talking about the larger piece. We have gotten to this point where we're arguing this. And the Republican Party decided, you know what? We can't use that word because then we move people away. Now, they didn't stop conceptually, right? It said, so instead of using that word, we need to say urban, we need to say busing, we need to say tough on crime. All they did was come up with a code system.
That's it.
And so, again, so the point is that the word is really just kind of like pretext. And so it exists and ultimately it is just a word. And people co-opt words all the time. Like some people ain't gonna like that I use this as a corollary. But Larry, when we was in high school, queer didn't really have nothing to do with gay.
Not at
Queer
all.
just meant that you was weird,
Well,
period.
weird. And to
Right?
be honest with you, the F word didn't have anything to do with gay. You know,
Right. And so, but not so what we see is a group's ability, to take a word and flip that word for what they believe it serves. And so, where I tend to disagree with folks, they tell me that that word can't be a term of endearment. It can be if that's what I choose. If I choose that and the person I'm talking to it receives it as such, then that's what it is.
well, I
And
mean,
so now
that
it may not be that, it may not have that kind of blanket,
effect,
right. But
effect. Yeah.
yeah,
I
but
mean, and if we're
if
honest,
that is then that's what it is. Now, an interesting thing is though, you juxtapose that like with the Adventures of Huck Finn, right? And so you read through the Adventures of Huck Finn, and there's parts where in his effort to help Jim, who is the enslaved African that ends up being his companion, where he's like, no, that's my nigga, right? And so that's a different possessive phrase, right? Then you know what I'm saying. And so, however, they do have a relationship, but it ain't that. You know what I'm saying? But and so all of these things matter. I'm clear on that. And but I think the whole piece is a little more nuanced than what is, kind of typically said. And again, if we're gonna take it, we got to take it all, right? I just don't. I don't. I just don't have value for the conversation in which, you know, I, it ain't like I got to go back to back in the day. I hear grown women call little girls bitch today.
right.
I hear grown women call. Now I don't hear them call them heifer as much. I used to hear, but it ain't because they think that's a bad word. They don't use it because they
They
call
lack
them
the
bitch.
they lack the depth. They lack the
Yeah.
depth of it
And
today.
so, so if we, and so like we be mad when, black men are disrespectful because they call black women bitch. Yeah, we do. And black women call black women bitches too. And, and a prime example, Asia. They asked Asia about the sister in the Olympics. They said one word to describe her. Asia on national TV after
She
winning
that
the
bitch.
gold medal.
I'm that bitch.
She that bitch. She
Yeah,
said
she that
that.
bitch. Yeah.
Now, again, I don't really care. But the point is that if we're gonna, if really to me, these are the things. Not that we don't have to have some kind of social decorum about us, but there's a degree to which I think all of that shit is escapism. Right. I definitely think that we need to do some things in terms of content that comes from our entertainers. I also think we got to do some things in terms of our content, and we'll talk about this next week, I'm sure. Well, we might not talk about it next week, but we'll probably talk about it very soon thereafter. We also got to do something with the content from our CBC, because you're telling me so the content that we got from our rappers can't be any more deadly than a CBC that takes money from the Jewish lobby. Right? So if we're going to talk about the use of words, let's talk about the use of those words.
Well,
Right?
brother, yeah, see there. Now, you are establishing the foundation on which the foundation needs to be leveled on. That's the real level set right there. So yeah, we're gonna get out of superfluity and get into this grown folk stuff now. So, well, listen, Doc, I think that you've given us enough to chew on for at least a week. These, a lot of these things need to be contemplated and assessed and analyzed and dealt with for years. And our 500-year plan needs to entail some of these things. So I think that's you have summed up everything nicely.
Thank you, sir.
and it
And
is
thus the level has been set.
the level has been set. And, and if it's God's will, we'll see you all next week. Doc, I love you.
Love you,
And
brother.
we appreciate you being so generous with your time and knowledge. And we look forward to seeing you all next week if it's the Lord's will.